Why don't you relax?
Well, to tell you the truth, Major, you're a girl and I'm a boy. And according to the Army training film number 62350...
But I only want to ask you a few questions.
Oh, okay.
Now, Private Bixby, how do you like the Army?
Well, up to now, it's been pretty dull.
No, I mean, how do you really like it?
Oh, well, I like it. I like the Army. I like the Army.
Have you been happy in it?
No.
Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. We are your hosts, Jordan and Kumar, that's me.
And me.
And this week we are talking about The Sad Sack from 1957. Definitely nobody's talking about this.
No.
I actually love it when we do
obscure
movies, really like ones that are not, no comic book movie podcast is talking about like Gwendoline and the Land of the Yak or The Sad Sack. Or...
That's it. It's genuine oblivion.
Yes.
They've absolutely lost to void.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sad Sack is based on a comic strip of the same name by Sergeant George Baker. Mm-hmm. Baker was a animator at Disney in 1937.
He was.
And then he joined the Army in 1941. He was called up. There's a funny thing he writes in the... Did you read the...
I did, and it is very
introduction? He says that he was striking at Disney, and because it was outside in the sun, walking around, he was actually in good shape. So he couldn't deny on health grounds...
Yeah.
Joined the Army. So
he regretted being in such great shape because he didn't get paid for it. He was striking.
Yes.
Damn it. I got into all this shape for the Army and they didn't even earn any money for it. It's quite a funny introduction to the book. Yeah.
So he started cartooning. He started drawing Sad Sack for Yank from their very first issue, which was one of the several military magazines. The more famous one is Stars and Stripes. Somehow I had never heard of Sad Sack or George Baker before, despite the movie. And so it ran in Yank until the end of the war, and then it became syndicated for newspapers, 46 to 58.
Yeah.
So it ran for a while, and then it stopped.
I'm surprised it ran even that long.
Yeah, that is surprising. I think he returned to civilian life, and it was kind of those kind of things happening.
The character returns to
the character,
life.
yeah.
So the character is an enlistee, a private in the US Army.
Yeah.
And it's essentially about the struggles of being in the Army. It's about Army life. It's a satire of Army life.
Yes. So in 57, he sold the rights to Harvey Comics. Now, so this is
57, not 47?
Well, so Harvey was doing reprints of all sorts of stuff like Blondie and Joe Palooka and stuff, but they didn't own those things. So they were doing reprints as early as like 1949, I think.
Okay.
Of Sad Sack. As far as I know, I saw two different sources say that in 57, George Baker sold the rights to Harvey Comics. Now, this is our first toe dip into the Harvey cinematic universe.
The HCU.
The HCU, because eventually we'll be getting to Casper and Richie Rich as well, which are probably the two most famous Harvey properties, but they had a lot of other junk. I also wanted to read, I don't know how much of this I might put this at the end of the episode, but this is from a book by Mark Lehner. Mark Lehner is an absurdist novelist. He writes these kind of stream of consciousness, bonkers, weird stories. And in this one, this was from Gone with the Mind, which was kind of a faux autobiography.
Okay.
And he's talking to a psychiatrist or his therapist who asks him what kind of comics he was into. And he says, somehow I got steered into Harvey Comics. And Harvey Comics, their roster of heroes consisted of an assortment of basically pathetic, feckless, feeble-minded pariahs. These were, come to think of it, actually the first misfits I befriended. A couple of them were clearly psychotic, but for the most part, they were just fantastically stupid. I mean, like mentally defective, low-grade moron stupid. Yeah, so Harvey, they're like the most anodyne comics. And yet, I counted... So there were 287 issues of Sad Sack comics from Harvey, starting in like 49. And then there were 400 spin-off comics of like Sad Sack and the Sarge, or Sad Sack and Friends.
Who was writing these?
George Baker
writing them?
No. Baker was like, he'd wash his hands of it. This was now a Harvey baby. So it was just a Harvey house artists. All the guys they're probably recycling all the same jokes in Casper and Richie Rich, I have to imagine. Just like all the same stuff over and over again. Because each of these comics has 4 or 5 page stories where it's just like a couple of guys. They're a bit like Archie's, but like worse. Like they're just for little kids. Anyway, somehow Sad Sack ended up there. My favorite is they put out a 3D issue of Sad Sack.
Wow.
And the cover of this thing is unbelievable because it's literally, he's in civilian clothes and he's literally being kicked out of his apartment by the landlord, whose like foot is up in the air, and he's been kicked in the butt out onto the street. And there's upstairs, I guess the landlord's wife is putting up a sign in the window that says room for rent, and it says, I'm looking at it right now, it's Sad Sack in 3D, so real it jumps out at you. So yes, you get this now homeless veteran being like 3D flying into your eyes. This is Harvey's idea of like tasteful comics or like funny. I don't know, it's craziness. Anyway,
well, to figure out just why the Harvey one is so lame,
yeah,
we should talk about the original one that ran in Yank.
Yes. Okay, so the first thing to mention is these are pantomime comics, so there's no dialogue. There's sometimes text on like signs and stuff like that, sound effects, but there's no speaking in them.
No.
It's all done through mime. And another interesting thing is it's kind of chronological. So we get him, he gets signed up, they measure him for a uniform. This is like one strip, and they're usually like 6 panels. He gets measured for uniform, he gets sent off to this place, the war with Germany ends, he gets shipped
to the Pacific,
etc. And all happens in a kind of... And
Manila, then he goes to Japan. And this is George Baker himself, according to that prologue, which we both read at the introduction. He actually travelled to all of these locations to do research for the comic. So he was employed by the US Army. So Yank was a US Army production. So the Army itself produced it. And it had enlistees who were serving in the Army, but whose job was to produce material for Yank magazine.
Yes.
So they're essentially morale, people working for the morale of the Army. And so Baker actually travelled from place to place, theatre to theatre, and experienced what life was like, or what the particular circumstances were in each of those theatres, and then he would go away and think for a while, and then eventually he would put out material including for the soldiers in that theatre, because at its peak, Yank had 21 editions.
Yes, right, yeah.
So it had an edition for each theatre in which US, or just about, probably not every theatre, but just about every theatre in which US Army soldiers were serving in some capacity. Yank magazine had an edition for that area, which is just, typical. This is a microcosm of the United States approach to industrial warfare during the Second World War, just to overwhelm every possible condition of war with just a torrent of material. Yeah.
And it wasn't just Yank. There was Stars and Stripes as well, and all the other, and a lot of cartoonists at that time who got called up ended up drawing for those magazines. Yep. Milton Caniff was another one. Will Eisner ended up doing instruction. Where he was drawing like the instruction manuals, like he did them as cartoons for that kind of stuff. Brilliant. Now, as I said, I'd never heard of George Baker, and I think he's been maybe overshadowed, especially by Bill Malden, who we'll end up talking about probably around this time next year.
He also rated a mention in the introduction.
Yes, because Yank kept on turning him down, and he's literally on postage stamps. He's on U.S. postage stamps that have Bill Malden cartoons on them. Like, he became an absolute giant of wartime cartooning. So yeah, these are chronological, and the other thing is, as we were texting each other this week, I was surprised how much I enjoyed these. He has a very fluid cartooning style, really naturalistic, and the other thing you pointed out about him traveling to other places was he said sometimes it would be a year later that he would, because he needed to remember the culture shock of being at a place. Because there's some really interesting cultural ones too, especially the Japan ones. There were some in there that I really enjoyed.
Yes.
But we'll get through some of those. Now, I would say I kind of divided these into categories.
Perfect.
I think maybe you had a similar approach. I started seeing patterns appearing. One was him being treated unfairly by commanding officers or superiors.
I would say around 50% or possibly more of all the comics are about being put upon by officers.
Yeah. So one time he comes in, he's qualified for a new uniform. So his CO measures him up and then gets all the new clothes out, like the shirt, the pants, and then Satak is about to take them and walk out, and the CO's like, no. The commanding officer gives his old uniform to Satak. Satak has to take those old ones, and the CO gets the new gear.
Yep.
And there's frequently ones like this where they toss his bunk and they find booze and they confiscate it, and then he sees them drinking it that night.
Yeah, in the officer's mess.
Yeah.
Constant occasions where he's trying to go somewhere or he's built something or done work, and the next thing you know, an officer has come along and appropriated it. There's one where he's in the field in the Pacific, and he builds a shower. So an outdoor shower, a wooden frame, a tub, a rope that you pull that makes the water splash through a kind of like a faucet. So he finishes it up, very proud of himself, dusts himself off, walks away, comes back later to take his shower. It now has officers only sign on it.
Yeah, there's another one where, a very early one, where he's like painting a wall with another private, and this private has like a very sharp chin and sharp nose. This is like really early one. And for some reason, he gets ragged out, which always happens to him. He gets chewed out for...
Sad sack's always being chewed out, he's very put upon.
He gets chewed out, the other guy gets promoted, and that guy stays above him for the rest of the 200 strips.
He becomes his nemesis, essentially, or the representative of every officer.
Yeah.
Every terrible officer.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. There's another one where he wants to get promoted. That's another category. So officers, like 90% of the comic. Then there'll be others like where trying to navigate army bureaucracy, either to get a promotion, to get out of the army, to try and not go sent to another theatre, or to get sent out, invalided out, or just demobbed. He can't do it.
Yeah.
There's a great one where he wants to get promoted, and so we know that because he has a thought balloon with some stripes on it, officer insignia, and he's walking around and looking at all the other officers, and they're all fat.
Yes. They've got huge bellies.
So he puts a pillow up his shirt.
Yeah.
He doesn't get promoted.
No.
It's genius.
Yeah.
I really like the very first comic, even. The very first one that you mentioned where he has his physical.
Yes.
He has his physical, and the process of the physical exhausts him.
Yeah, he gets pumped, he gets prodded and pummeled in so many ways that he's just like... He's a sack. He's like a sack.
Yeah, and he has to sort of run on the spot, all the typical stuff. And putting the lie to what Baker said in his introduction about how he was being in very good shape when he joined up. So in this case, Sadsack is in such bad shape that just doing the physical exhausts him, and his rating that he gets at the end, IA, stands for initial accession, which means he's had absolutely no training.
Right.
So he's just a sack of crap civilian.
And then they
this
literally
is his
drag him
introduction
away.
to army life. Yeah.
They literally, two men drag him away. He's like unconscious.
He's like a sack of potatoes.
Yeah.
And then the very next page, they fit him for his uniform, and the uniform fits perfectly. And when the officer sees that, they pull it off him and give him one that doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Then he has to get shoelaces, and he has to visit about 5 different...
He's trying to get new boots, or was trying to get new boots, and then when he finally gets them, the laces snap in the last panel.
He has to see about 5 different, petty officers. Each one has a different title, and he goes from one to the next, to the next, to the next. It's just a very... I think anyone can relate. You don't even have to have been in the army to relate to this, but I imagine I certainly think it's very funny, knowing what I know.
I actually want some of another category of strips, which I actually liked, was the ones I didn't get. There were a few where I was like, there was one where you had to show this woman got mad at him for not showing his ration card or something, and then he got thrown out. I was like, I don't quite get it. But I felt like it was specifically for Army personnel, and they would get it, and I appreciated that. I was like, that's good. I like how specific this is.
There were a couple about ladies.
Yes.
Which were very funny, that I've made a note of. There's a great one. So, enlist these, when you join the army, presumably you have to sit through a lot of these kinds of, what they called indoctrination ones in that Teen Titan comic that we read. You have to sit through a lot of indoctrination. And one is sexual hygiene.
Yes. I think the strip is called Sexual Hygiene or something like that. Yeah.
Yep. And he basically sits through a short film, it looks like, or perhaps presentation on, the horrors of venereal disease.
Yeah, and we just see the audience watching in horror. We don't see what's on screen.
And then he goes out and he's introduced to a woman, and she holds out her hand to shake it, and he puts on a rubber glove.
A really thick rubber glove to shake her hand, yeah.
There's an even better one later on. Now he's asleep and he's dreaming.
Yes.
We don't even see what he's dreaming about.
Yeah.
But we know he's
having a great time. He's smiling.
Having a really great dream.
Yeah.
Essentially, he's having a wet dream.
Yeah.
And, sorry, this is so funny. When he wakes up, he instantly panics and runs to the pro station,
Yeah.
which is the prophylactic
Yeah.
station,
Yeah.
to get a prophylaxis.
Yeah.
Because he's been so affected by all these lectures about sexual hygiene that just because he had a wet dream, he has to go and get, like some sulfate powder or something to put down his pants.
Some of these are racy. Like they are for Yank magazine. These were not for public consumption.
That's true. They were never sold on newsstands.
One of those that I loved was he meets his prostitute, and the strip is called The Proposition, and he whispers something in her ear. They go back to her place, and she's ironing his pants in the last panel. I loved it. I love that one.
Very, very
so that was another one of my categories, was the kind of racier ones.
Yes. Yes. There's another one where he has it's again where he's sleeping and he has a fantasy about a woman performing a striptease.
Yes.
And when all is bared, there are black censor bars.
Censor bars, yeah.
So with this one, it's because outgoing mail is censored during wartime. So he would have been all the people reading this, and it was mostly private enlistees, so not officers, just the regular people in the army. They would all have been familiar with this process, the process of having your letter torn up. The incoming letters from home with blacked out, stuff that you weren't allowed to read. So the fact that you'd have a dream where the woman's breasts are blacked out is very funny.
There was another one, too, where he was writing to a sweetheart back home, we assume, because I think of a thought balloon with a pretty girl's face in it, like Girl Next Door. And then his bunkmate is laughing at him or something, and then he seals it up, and then later he sees the censors are laughing.
They're all laughing at him. Yeah, okay, brilliant. Everyone would have had a horror about the censors reading their mail, because they did, and they probably still do. Can you imagine putting down your thoughts to your beloved at home about how much you miss her?
Yeah.
And then you think, they're professionals, right? They're just going to read my letter. But no, they're laughing about it.
Yeah.
So really there was a quote from the introduction that I'll just read out quickly about a big part of why this is still really funny and really clever to read, which is what he talked about, how he travelled from theatre to theatre and learned a lot and put them in the comic. But then he went on to say the greatest source of material for the sack, however, was the army itself. Since the army has no relationship with time, place, or thing, and even remains basically the same under the opposing influences of war and peace, any idea based on the machinations of the army, the red tape, the officers, or the thousands of consistent inconsistencies of the system would be accepted and understood by GIs, or soldiers, anywhere.
Yeah.
Or even to civilians.
Yes. I have
reading it 80 years later.
Yes. I have one more category, which was the bittersweet ones. So there's one where he's in his bunker, and it's got posters of girls and stuff. It's got all his stuff. And he goes out on a mission or whatever, and he comes across a Nazi bunker, empty. And he's like, I'm going to trash this place. And he trashes it. He goes back home and his place is trashed. Another one, he gets leave to go to town. He goes into town. It's just rubble. It's just complete rubble. The city that he's been hoping to go to.
Yeah.
There are a few like that. And there's also one where it's just a full page one where he's lying down sleeping. The whole page is a thought balloon, and he's imagining all the things he's going to do at home. See girls, go out, do all these kinds of stuff. And there's a newspaper headline at the bottom. He's got a newspaper sitting next to him that says, Germany surrenders. But then his CO is there about to wake him up with his orders to go to
the Pacific.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the war in the Pacific basically went on for another year.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. Bittersweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. There's some great timeless content, but also there's also some stuff that's specific to the Second World War.
Yes.
Only a little, but there's some. And that's great, very rewarding if you're a history buff, which I happen to be, and you can enjoy that too. So a real piece of history. I can well imagine these sorts of comics would be distributed in history classes.
Yeah.
If you wanted to brighten up your seminar or your tutorial or your lecture that you were giving on the Pacific theatre of the Second World War or the European theatre of the Second World War, you could show some of these comics, and it would be just such a great time capsule and would absolutely brighten up the content of your of your class. So very, very much enjoyed these.
I wanted to point out, maybe two. There's one in Japan after Japan has surrendered, and it's him walking through town, and every single person bows to him.
Yep.
Every man, woman, little kids are bowing to him.
Yep.
And he's got this kind of look of amusement on his face. Then he gets back to base, and he's just berated by his COs.
Officers. It's called, I took a picture of it, it's called The Enemy.
Yes.
So he's in Japan, he's working in ruined Tokyo because it's rubble again.
Yes.
A Japanese serviceman salutes him.
Yep.
A Japanese woman in a kimono bows to him. A man takes off his hat. The little kid, as you said, even like bows and salutes him, and then he goes into camp. And who is the real enemy?
Yeah.
It's the bastards in charge.
Yeah.
A nice little message too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of comics at this time, so speaking of comics, which I read when I studied history, a lot of them were not this kind to Japanese people. Some of them were very offensive.
I would say there's one strip in here which has a super ugly racist caricature in it. Just one out of the ones that are collected.
Where he's looking for some beautiful Pacific bells.
Yeah, he arrives and he sees them, but it turns out they're actually USO entertainers.
And they leave.
They get on the plane and leave.
That one, yes, it stood out for its ugliness, but it also stood out because it's literally the only one.
Yes.
Out of dozens and dozens of cartoons. This otherwise, for the time, like, it focused all of its ire on good old American officers. And and none of it for the enemy soldier. Like we barely see an enemy soldier. I think he kills one in one.
There's one, he kills a Japanese soldier. It's actually an amazing one, and he's got his sword. He's taken the Japanese sword from this guy.
And the officer steals the
sword. And the officer steals the sword off of him that he killed another person for.
Yeah.
And it was like his trophy.
There's another one where poor old Sadsack keeps getting turned down. Like, he's always trying to get a date. That's another one, as you mentioned, the racy ones, where he's trying to get a date, and he's either rejected or it's for something like he just wants his trousers pressed.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's one where he's knocked back in America. He's knocked back by the French belles.
Yeah. He's
knocked back by another one, or even prostitutes are knocking him back. And then he arrives in occupied Germany, and a German Hausfrau propositions him, and he instantly rejects her.
Yeah.
And I'm not 100% sure of the context here. I think maybe they were encouraged not to fraternize with German women.
There's a word balloon above his head that says like $25, $65. So I think he'd be fine.
Right. Yes.
If he was to...
I don't know the specific context, but yes, I think it was probably disincentivized for him to fraternize with German women. So, but again, this isn't an unpleasant caricature of German people.
No. Agreed.
Like, she's a friendly lady.
Yeah.
She wants to spend time with him, and he's like, no!
Yeah, and the Japanese characters, it'd be very easy for cartoonists to go to that same caricature, which was the standard at the time.
Buck teeth.
He doesn't do it.
No, they just look like, they're slightly exaggerated characteristics, but I mean, it's a comic, they're caricatures, but they don't have buck teeth.
No.
They don't have glasses, they don't look like monsters.
No, and he's a very, as I said before, he's a very good cartoonist with a kind of very inviting style, I guess, or loose. It's very comfortable, despite all how depressed and beaten Sadsack is all the time.
I mean, it's the fun of the comic that he's always put upon.
Yes.
He can never catch a break.
Yeah.
If he thinks someone's hitting on him, it turns out they just want something out of him. Like, that happens a couple of times in a few of the comics. He gets used for drinks.
Yes. Yeah.
So he meets up with a lady in a Parisian saloon or what have you, pays for all her drinks, and then the next thing you know, old sharp nose, sharp chin shows up, puts his hand on her shoulder, and off they go, and he's left with the bill.
He's always for a huge amount of drinks. Yeah.
He's always left with the bill over and over.
Yeah.
It's very funny. Really love it.
So when it went to Harvey tried to continue with the pantomime for the first few issues.
Okay.
In civilian life, not done by Baker, so they're not nearly as clever.
They don't look as good. They're coloured. No. They're just 6-panel.
Yeah.
Instead of the great flowing.
Yes, they're because he didn't use panel borders. That's another key thing. They just flowed. So they're very stiff, and then eventually they gave up on that because I guess they weren't even clever enough for that, and they went into a standard.
Sorry, before you talk any more about Harvey.
Yes.
I just opened my phone and I just reminded myself of my absolute favourite.
Okay, let's hear it.
I love this. It's called Mechanized War. I can't even remember what it was. And it's a long, long row of tanks.
Oh, I love this one. Yes, it's one panel. It's one huge...
One full-page spread.
Yep.
And yes, as you say, a single panel, and it's just a mountain range with a long snaking line of tanks going off into the distance, and at the very front is Sadsack with a minesweeper.
Yeah, amazing.
So all of this hardware,
yeah,
in the all of the pinnacle of the technology of warfare, and they're all just queued up behind a bloke with his stick with a minesweeper on the end, and can only move at the speed of Sad Sack, and it's just so clever.
It is really. And all of this was done, hundreds of pages with no dialogue.
Yeah.
So, the Harveys, as we mentioned, are pretty crap. The first few issues were signed George Baker. It's very obviously not George Baker. It's Harvey House artists. But early on, I think in the mid-40s, he started appearing on radio.
Oh my god, really?
Voiced by Mel Blanc, basically doing...
Oh yeah, I did see that.
Basically doing his stuttering Porky Pig voice. Now, you'd think a silent character would be the last one you'd get... Now, I listened to those radio bits. There's a few on YouTube, and they're decently funny, but it's just such an odd choice to adapt it into radio, voiced by Mel Blanc talking a mile a minute. Is Porky Pig. Very weird.
Although, that might explain how we ended up with Jerry Lewis.
Yes.
As playing...
Yes, well, this is...
If there's a connection there,
I think
that was the stepping stone.
I do think
or the catalyst that made that character possible, because that character is nothing like the Sad Sack.
Based on the cartoon character created by George Baker, it says in the opening credits of this movie. But other than the words Sad Sack, they give him a name. Sad Sack in the comic does not have a given name.
Nope, he's just called Private Sad Sack.
Yeah, Private Sad Sack.
It's often on his papers.
That's right.
Or on his bunk, it'll say Private
Okay, so I guess his name is Sad Sack. But in this movie, his name is Bixby?
Meredith Bixby. He has a... Meredith, I guess, even the name's supposed to be funny. Even in 1957, Meredith, I guess, is a funny name for a guy.
I guess? They didn't mention it that much.
No, it's not laboured.
So, okay, 1945 to 1956, we have the Martin and Lewis, the Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis combo. Mm-hmm. They split apart for mysterious reasons, which we don't know, from 56. They've made at this stage 13, 14, 15 movies, something like that. And they had the radio shows, the TV shows, all that stuff had happened. Suddenly, Jerry Lewis is on his own.
Yeah.
No straight man.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm going to carry these movies. Or the studios are like trying to find a way to work this.
This is about more or less the first film, or one of the very first, that he did after splitting.
It's a second. Okay. It's a second solo movie. He wouldn't so this is 57. 1960 we get The Bellboy, which is the big Jerry Lewis one that he directed himself in, and which is he does not speak in.
Wow.
It's all pantomime. And he actually, I think, spoke to Stan Laurel for advice on how to handle it.
Wow.
Then 63 is The Nutty Professor.
Nutty Professor, okay.
So he's finding his feet.
I guess so.
At this stage. Dean Martin's in Ocean's 11 in 1960, so that's a few years after the break as well. Mm-hmm. Jerry Lewis is in Lil Abner in 1959 for 10 seconds, if you'll remember. He had popped his head on. So this is before all that kind of stuff.
Actually. Yeah, yes. So he's still finding his feet, as you say, but very much promotional material for the film is all about Jerry Lewis being the star.
Yes.
Like there's a poster you can see on Wikipedia, the poster for the film. It's basically just got a giant Jerry Lewis head at the top yelling annoyingly. I can hear this poster.
Yes. Directed by someone named George Marshall, who has 187 credits on IMDb. I don't know who he is. Movie starts, we get a Sad Sack theme song sung by Jerry Lewis, which is pretty grating and stupid.
Yes, I'm the genuine, original Sad Sack.
Yeah, I might chop that into the show so people have to suffer through it the way we did. I will say, well, what's your take on Jerry Lewis in life? Not in this movie, in general.
Well, look, Jerry Lewis, I think, he's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I think maybe time has passed since he was popular, that his style of comedy I don't think people really would relate to these days.
Yeah.
I think it's really hard to watch Jerry Lewis movie and enjoy it these days.
Yeah,
He's pretty annoying.
I'm going to say I like Jerry Lewis. I think because I shouldn't say because there were always Martin and Lewis movies on TV on a Saturday afternoon, much like Elvis movies, because there were so many. There was always one on, and I watched them, and I liked the screwball comedian. I liked Peter Sellers in the Pink Panther movies. I grew up liking that stuff. The reason I shouldn't say I like it because Elvis movies were also on. I'm not a fan of Elvis's acting at all, but I did like Jerry Lewis's screwball style. I think The Bellboy is really good. Well, it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't work. When it works, it's really great. I love The Night Professor, where, interestingly, he's playing his own straight man in that movie.
Yeah.
He's kind of playing against himself.
Those two movies are kind of like classic movies.
Yeah.
Whereas, he's in lots of other movies and he's always the same.
Yes, that's the problem. Now, is it true that the French think he's a genius? Maybe because I'm Canadian, it's my French blood that is making me appreciate Jerry Lewis. I don't know.
Love it. Well, the Wikipedia page lists the French receipts for the film.
Okay.
It's a little early to talk about box office.
Well, let's hear it anyway, since we're on the subject.
In France, this film, because in France they track box office numbers differently. They go by tickets sold,
Okay.
not by total cost. We know that from the week we did Genevieve in the Land of the Yik Yak.
Yes.
This film had 1,878,500 admissions for the year 1957 in France. So to put that in perspective, Gwendolen, 30 years later, had less than 1 million.
Okay.
And the biggest film of that year had 6 million.
Okay.
So this is almost 2 million admissions in 1957.
Wow.
I think it did very well
Yeah.
in France.
Yeah. What's the population of France?
In 1957?
That seems like a large number, 2 million.
The population of France is pretty high.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the exact figure is for 1957. Citation needed.
So, okay, as I said, directed by George Marshall. Also, so we start with, after we get through the theme song, we get sad sack. Jerry Lewis is sitting on a train going somewhere. Two other soldiers come in. He's immediately like Sherlock Holmes. He's like, oh, you've been on leave and
That's
you're with
so
the redhead.
weird.
And it's like, oh, okay. So he's identifying this because one guy's got like his furlough card in his pocket.
Yeah,
And the other guy's
furlough card, yeah.
The other guy's got like a red hair on his jacket.
Red hair could have been his mother's hair.
Yeah.
You'd be sorry to leave that redhead behind.
Yes.
And like, have you been following us? No, he's Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes did.
With deduction. That's something he never really does again, actually,
No.
because he's completely hopeless in every situation in which he finds himself.
Yeah, well, also in this, he's also memorized the manuals, the army manuals for, like, constructing things, like building and, like,
He has a photographic memory, but only for the contents of the US Army manuals.
yes.
He
He had a
doesn't seem to
judo
be able-
manual, as we learn later.
Well, yes, a judo manual too. So perhaps it was a US Army
It might have
judo
been a
manual.
U.S. Army manual. So for some reason, this is... okay, anyway.
It kind of makes the plot happen.
It's necessary for the plot to
But this
happen.
is,
Absolutely. For
needless to say,
but
this
he's
is not something
but
that
it-
the Sad Sack from the comics, either incarnation, neither the Harvey
No.
Comics nor the Yankee incarnation, he's absolutely not a deductive wizard. He absolutely does not have a photographic
No.
memory.
No.
Look, we just come out right now and say
Also-
it. This character is nothing like
No.
Sad Sack.
Also, so these two guys, he starts annoying them immediately. They're trying to sleep. I was like, oh, are these guys going to be Russian spies? No.
No.
One of them, by the way, is played by David Wayne.
Yes.
I looked this up because I only know him. I was like, he looks familiar. He's in How to Marry a Millionaire.
Yeah,
which
he's in
is-
lots of films, yeah.
And he's also in, I can't remember. There was a science fiction one in the 70s. A Michael Crichton one, maybe? I can't remember. Anyway, so they're trying to sleep, and then Sad Sack feels like the light's getting in their eyes. They're on the train. So he starts waving a book up in the air as if that's going to block the light.
Yeah.
And it fails, so he jumps up, and then he accidentally breaks the light, and then grabs the cable to stop the train.
So this is
There's also now,
classic Jerry Lewis pratfalls.
it is absolute pratfalls, but my thing is, he's so stupid to think that he could block the light that's in these guys' faces by holding up a book in front of it, and...
Well, he notices that. Yeah, it's just stupid. It doesn't make sense. There's another thing. He's
how-
always volunteering. The Sad Sack. One of the messages of the Sad Sack is, and it's the classic kind of army lesson: never volunteer for anything.
Yes.
Because whenever Sad Sack volunteers in the Yank magazine comics, he always either gets the credit taken, or he ends up with more work, or he ends up in trouble.
Yeah.
So Sad Sack is just trying to get by without having all this shit put upon him. He's just trying to get out of the army, or he's trying to get lucky, and he's absolutely not a gung-ho, positive, helpful person. Like, Jerry Lewis is always trying to help. The Sad Sack Jerry Lewis is always trying to help people.
Yeah, why does he care so much about helping these guys?
Yeah.
He feels like he's offended them. They're not his commanding officers or anything.
No.
He hasn't been ordered to do it. He's just like, for some reason, super helpful. He's got a photographic memory. He's Sherlock Holmes, but he's also super dumb. And immediately, this is the first 5 minutes of the movie. Immediately, you're like, none of this is adding up.
But they go to sleep, and he says he'd wake them up at Memphis, but then, is it at Memphis that said they wake them up
They
at
need
Memphis?
to get off at Memphis.
Yeah, like it matters. Sorry. But then after that is when he has the big dust up, causes the train to stop, everyone's luggage falls everywhere. They throw luggage on him and say, sit there, don't move, don't disturb us again. And then, of course, so then he doesn't wake them up when they get to Memphis, and they end up, like, in Texas or something. And, they all have to go back to their Camp Calhoun.
Yeah.
And they're like, why didn't you wake us up at Memphis? And he's, you were sleeping so peacefully. I didn't want to bother you. I was worried you'd be mad at me. It's like, you idiot.
Yeah.
This is the same guy that decided a red hair on his coat meant that he was seeing a red head.
Exactly. Yeah, he
just doesn't add up.
So they get to their base finally. At this point, I'm still thinking these guys are going to be Russian spies or something. No, they're just kind of bad soldiers, I guess. So it's not even...
They're more like Sad Sack than Sad Sack is, because they're just trying to get to a nice... Kind of like... They're trying to go to Morocco so that they can visit the Casablanca.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, they're just trying to bumble through, and then they get roped into the plan to turn Bixby into a real soldier.
Right, so
they don't want to volunteer for that.
When they get to the base, we find out, meanwhile, that there's this woman, this major's arrived, and she's running some kind of psychological experiment to see if they could turn the most incapable people into army material.
That's it. She mentions that every year they get a certain number of congenital inferiors.
Yeah.
Which is not a term that would fly.
Yeah.
Now, that the army is stuck not knowing what to do with, and apparently it goes right up to the Pentagon. They brought her in as a commissioned officer from a... She always has to keep explaining to everybody.
Yeah.
Because, of course, no one can believe that she's a major.
Yes.
Or why she has her commission. So she has to say over and over that she was formerly a consultant for this Massachusetts Institute of Behavioral Science or something. And she has to say it constantly, because otherwise we couldn't possibly accept that a woman could be a major. And so she's been tasked with a way to find out how to turn these sad sacks into army material.
So this is actually...
So this is the premise, or the first half of the film,
Well, it's the first premise. It gets forgotten.
Yeah.
Because I actually thought, this is kind of sinister. It's interesting, trying to turn ordinary people into army material.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of a sinister, interesting... Nowadays it would play out very differently if this was the plot of a movie.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. But nothing... It never goes anywhere.
And it's left behind. They never... In fact, that whole thing about trying to build him up... And also, what about his photographic memory? Aren't you going to try that? Wouldn't you try to access this?
You could during the Second World War, you could have George Baker do nothing but draw comics for 4 years.
Yeah.
And you can't find a use in peacetime for Private Bixby, who has a photographic memory.
Yeah.
That's some bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Bixby comes in, talks to her. There's actually some funny bits
This is about one of the few funny bits in the movie where he thinks she's trying to do psychotherapy on him, so she has him lie down on the couch, and he thinks he's being propositioned.
Yeah.
This could have been a strip in Sad
Yeah, and she takes off her
jacket.
And she says something to him at the time, which is kind of suggests... Oh, and he says, I've seen those army training films. That's the only thing that kind of...
Looks like Sad Sack, yeah.
Felt like the Sad Sack comic, because he says, I've seen that army training films, and when men and women, and he's just kind of cutting himself off.
Yeah, he's really uncomfortable in this situation. Or is he expecting something that's not going to happen? And that's the sort of thing that could have happened to the original Sad Sack.
Yes.
He thinks he's met a woman, and it's really just his CO who wants to
and there is a good
sign him up for a mission he doesn't want to do.
Jerry Lewis moment in here, which is a bit like the Mel Blanc radio bits, where she says, do you like being in the army? And he stutters his way through it. He says, the army. I like being in the army. No. And I really laughed at that little bit. So she decides he's right for this program.
Yep.
She assigns these two guys from the train.
Yep, to be his minders.
Yes, but they've encountered him twice. There's another scene earlier where there are some hijinks. So they really hate this guy. They don't have to deal with him.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
But then it eventually...
His CO tells him to move a truck, and he tries to move it physically. Like, he tries to push the truck. I was like, you've memorized these armor manuals?
And what's more, why did he try to move it? He tries to explain something to the sergeant, but we never hear what it is.
Yeah.
Because he's cut off by the sergeant. Just move it, private! So he tries to push it. The thing is, you've never seen a truck before? You don't know how to start the truck? But he does know how to start the truck.
Yeah.
Because he starts it and activates the lifter,
Yeah.
the dumper, it dumps a bunch of gravel on the sergeant who's sitting in a Jeep right behind the truck. And then he comes out and he says, "Hey, sorry, Sergeant, the button was in the wrong spot, non-regulation spot." So it's like, you know what a regulation truck should look like,
Yeah.
and this truck looked... So you couldn't figure out a truck.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
The two blokes end up, David Wayne and his comrade, they end up taking on the job, partly because they decide that they can just get him to do all the work that they're assigned, and if anything goes wrong, they can just blame him, because he's already got a reputation for being a walking disaster. You know, he keeps pulling threads off people's clothes. Like, a general comes in to meet him.
Yeah.
He goes, "I want to see the man that lost a tank." Because he lost the tank in his backstory. And, you know, Jerry Lewis does Jerry Lewis stuff. "Oh, you've got a thread there." And he starts pulling on it, and he just pulls his tie right off.
Yeah.
So what are you doing? In what universe is it a good idea to start yanking the thread off a general's uniform?
Yeah. So these two other guys, the David Wayne character and his mate, end up taking him to this bar.
Yes.
I think they think they can goof off. They're supposed to be taking him for shooting training or something. They take him to this
But
bar.
they just decided to take him to a bar instead.
We end up with a big bar fight because this woman propositions or kind of decides to start dancing with Sad Sack. I thought she was going to be a prostitute, but this movie's too anodyne for that.
Yeah,
she's
anodyne,
actually
good
just I guess, genuinely interested in him.
Or she just wants a drink. I don't know, because she has a fella.
Yes.
Who's built like an absolute brick shithouse.
Yeah.
This is a huge dude.
Yeah.
He walks in and he's like, so much for your sick grandma, huh? She goes, "I changed my mind. It's my prerogative. If you have a problem, take it up with my date." And it's Jerry Lewis. And he turns around and
he starts doing judo on them.
Yeah.
He's memorized judo, so he actually kicks these guys' asses. There's a huge bar fight. He actually comes out on top.
It's so silly, you know. He'll do,
and he's
like,
clever enough to disguise himself as an MP.
That's pretty funny.
To get out of there.
That's pretty funny. So you're right. There's a big bar fight, and after he'll flip a guy over his shoulder and throw him across the room. And then he'll go, "I read that in a judo manual."
Yes.
Oh god. Anyway, the MPs arrive, and then Jerry Lewis starts beating the shit out of the MPs.
Yes.
Which I'm sure warmed the heart of any service person watching the film, because apparently everyone hates MPs. And then, as you say, he knocks one out. His mates get grabbed, arrested by the other MPs. He grabs the MP's armband, puts on his hat, says, "I'll take these guys, you're wanted over there," and he rescues them.
Yes, but then he drives them back to the WAC barracks, the Women's Army Corps.
Yep.
They spend the night there not realizing they're there until the next morning when Jerry goes to get in the shower and it's full of women.
Yep.
And then they have to get out of there, but they get caught, and then they get marched back to their own base along with the women.
This sequence is really long.
Yes.
And it could have been really sleazy, but I think it's mostly played okay. There is a bit where, to punish them, the sergeant of the barracks, the staff sergeant, the lady, the fearsome woman, basically makes them get dressed in front of them. She makes them stand in the corner and put on their clothes while the women hoot at them.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I thought was a pretty reasonable turnaround for guys that they assumed were perverts who had been slept in the women's barracks because they're perverts.
Yeah.
Anyway, they get out and they're in serious trouble.
There's a funny line in this scene too when they get back, because they're obviously going to get demoted by their own sergeant. So one of the two guys pulls off his stripes.
Is one enough?
One of two, and the other guy pulls off his one stripe. Jerry Lewis doesn't have any. He says, "I'll have to owe you one." The sergeant says, "Well, thank you, Private," and he says he trusts me, and, like, genuinely believes that he was being thanked.
Yeah. Well, that scene is quite funny because they march in with the wax.
Yes.
At the head of the wax, and all the men are like catcalling them again. and the sergeant's just calling them ladies constantly.
Yeah.
You think that's probably going to carry on for the rest of the film? No, it doesn't. They just sort of forget about it by the next scene.
And then suddenly there's a kind of romance between the David Wayne character and the Major.
So in contrast to, this is awful.
It's
awful.
really bad, and it's not, you get 7 minutes of no Sad Sack where he's coming on to her in their office.
And it's played so disgustingly. So anyway, let's bring it.
It's played like a 1957 romance out of Hollywood.
But this is so inappropriate because she's his commanding officer.
Yeah.
All right, hold on. We have a jingle for this.
Okay.
Cishet male solve sexism. Right. It's not just that he's the dynamic, cool, unemotional, authoritative man.
Yes.
And she's the weak, emotional, inefficient woman. It's that she's literally in charge of him.
Yeah.
It's such a bizarre scene because she's his commanding officer and she's all flustered and blushing.
He comes in, he starts saying, you're sentimental because you're a woman.
Yeah, people keep telling her, you're a woman.
Yeah.
You don't understand this because you're a woman. She's literally a major in the army, and she constantly has to, as I said earlier, she constantly has to explain why she's in charge. They would, in real life, even in 57, these guys would just salute.
Yeah.
But in this film, they're constantly saying, oh, wow, you're really well put together. How come you're in that uniform, sweetheart? She goes, actually, I'll have you know, I'm a highly qualified so-and-so. It's like, no, you don't. It's not supposed to be so odd. The WACs have been around, the Women's Army Corps have been around since before the Second World War, really, when they were the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps. And then they became the Women's Army Corps and a full branch of the Army in early 1940s. So this is not unusual, okay? There are women officers and there are women in uniform and have been for many years. It's just so gross.
Yeah, well, he literally chases her around the office.
Yeah, he manhandles her.
Yeah, and then the phone rings, and she answers the phone, and she hears that about what he had done, that he'd spent the night at the WAC barracks, which she didn't know beforehand. And then she suddenly snaps back to her rank, and
only partly, though, because she sort of stamps her foot, and she's a bit petulant.
Yes,
and he's still... Oh, he's just calm and collected. Oh, sorry, baby. Don't get too emotional there.
Yeah.
I just couldn't...
And then
I could barely watch it.
And then there was what should have been a Jerry Lewis scene where she can't open the door because the doorknob's jammed, and then it comes out in her hand, and he takes the doorknob from her and puts it back in. This is not for these two. These are straight men.
He has to fix her fan, too. Yeah, you're right. It's not a comic bit. It's like, look at the woman can't even open a door.
I think it's supposed to be a comic bit, but these are the straight.
It doesn't feel like. Yeah, you're right.
They're not funny men.
It's not like Jerry Lewis pulled the doorknob off and she's trapped in a room with Jerry Lewis and she's like, I've got to get out of my room with this madman.
Yes.
Instead, she's desperately trying to resist the sexy advances of David Wayne.
Yeah.
And she's so flustered by his machismo that the doorknob comes off in her hand. She's like, oh, I got to get out of here. And he has to take it out of her hand and put it back in the door, and he leaves cool as a cucumber.
Yeah, the door opens for him for some reason.
It was so... Thankfully, that's sort of the last we see of these characters interacting until the very end of the film, but I found it really hard to watch.
Yeah.
So
now there's a scene at the shooting range. There's something about going to Morocco. I couldn't follow it all. The guys want to go to Morocco.
They're not allowed to go because of sleeping in the WAC barracks, and they're really disappointed by that.
And they also need to get Sadsack a good score on his shooting practice.
They did, but by this point they don't. What happened was, when Wayne goes into the room with the major, she's so happy with the job they've done in a day because Bixby has signed up for another term of duty.
Oh, right.
He was due to be demobbed or to leave the army.
But when is the scene where they go to the shooting range?
That's later.
Okay.
So what happens is, because they've done such a great job, Bixby and them are going to go to Morocco.
Okay.
So they're back on the list to go to Morocco.
Okay.
And they're so thrilled by that. Wayne is so thrilled by that he decides that he's going to teach Bixby to shoot. So this is just to be a good guy.
But then why do they care if he gets a good score or not?
Because he feels paternalistic towards Bixby at this point, because Bixby's got them back on the flight to Morocco.
Huh, I never would have figured that out.
It's not really very...
Because they really make sure he gets 100%. They fake him getting bullseyes.
Yeah.
In a very long kind of bit. Sometimes they're shooting from behind and he thinks it's... Jerry Lewis thinks it's a hair trigger, but it's actually David Wayne that was shooting secretly from behind him.
Yeah.
But I like at the end of this that Jerry Lewis thinks he's such an ace shot. He himself doesn't know that they've cheated him and made it look like he's They tries to shoot over his shoulder while looking in a mirror.
Yes. And he shoots out the tire on the general's Jeep.
Which is like a 3/4 of a mile away or something.
And there's a cute moment where the general gets out, looks at it and goes, there's a bullet. How could there be a bullet in the tire? And someone in the Jeep says, well, the shooting range is over there. Because it's 3/4 of a mile away, and they would be facing the opposite direction. Yeah. And he goes, I think I know who this was.
Yes.
And it's a cute little moment.
Yeah.
Which, unfortunately, they're a bit few and far between these cute moments.
By the way, I haven't mentioned that there's occasionally voiceovers from the David Wayne character in this movie.
Yeah.
Not from Sad Sack, from the David Wayne.
Yes.
Bizarrely, you forget they're there, and then suddenly they reappear again.
Was there one at the start?
There was one at the
Okay.
very beginning when they get on the train. They're like, "I'm going to tell you the story of Sad Sack." Kind of
Yes,
thing.
you're right. And then and there's not another one for another hour.
Well, yeah, 55 minutes in, when they go to Morocco, suddenly we get the voiceover again.
It's like, oh yeah, the voiceover.
The voiceover.
This is probably the funniest line of the film, where and so we were on our way to Morocco. Me, the other guy, and Private Bixby. Halfway there, the other guy tried to push Private Bixby out of the emergency exit, and then I made the biggest mistake of my life. I stopped him.
Yeah.
This is played so dry.
Yes.
I liked it.
So 55 minutes into this movie, a 100-minute movie, they arrive in Morocco, and now we get another plot.
A whole new plot kicks off.
A whole new plot. It's a bit like Top Gun, where you don't meet the enemy until the last, 10 minutes. Suddenly there's an enemy that they fly out into combat. Very crazy. Suddenly, we get this... when we arrive in Morocco, we see these men plotting to... they've been stealing...
They've stolen a mechanized cannon, which coincidentally
pieces.
we know that Bixby can put together because it's one of the army manuals that he memorized.
Yeah.
Which is essentially what forms the plot of this second half of the movie. And in fact, when you read the plot synopsis online, that's what the plot synopsis for the movie is.
Right.
Despite it not starting until an hour in.
Right. Okay, so these guys are stealing this piece by piece. They're trying to assemble it.
Yeah.
Peter Lorre is one of these guys for some reason.
Well, yeah. So I was so thrilled to see him in this film because this is very much when his career's in the doldrums. He's gained an enormous amount of weight.
Yeah.
He had some serious health issues. He's addicted to morphine.
Okay.
Which was prescribed for apparently a crippling gallbladder condition that he had. So it's not like he was shooting up for fun.
Yeah.
And I think he's just happy to get work.
Yes.
And they've clearly cast him because it's in Morocco, and it's harking back to one of his most famous roles in Casablanca.
Well, actually, every time he handled that knife, I kept thinking of M.
Well, yeah, that too.
Which I don't think we were supposed to think of, but...
No.
I was like, every time he was walking around holding that knife, I was like, oh...
Thinking of him. I did think about him too as well, because isn't there there's a slight, a greater than zero chance that we might do M one day.
Yes,
for
as
this
a cheat,
podcast.
yes.
As a cheat, yeah. And then Peter Lorre would be on the way to becoming an all-star.
Oh,
so
yeah. That's right.
That would be really something.
Wait a second, would he? Because he wasn't in Barbed Wire, he was in Casablanca.
Good point. He'd have to be a cheat all-star for a cheat episode.
Yeah. So our boys arrive in Morocco. They leave the base. They are
To get
looking,
potatoes.
Yeah, they're actually looking for girls.
Yeah. They have a bar they want to go to.
Yeah, so the two guys go into a place that's advertises 60 girls, 60. Meanwhile, Jerry Lewis wanders off to this other place, and we get a long song and dance number. It's a full song and dance number in the middle of this movie.
With the local femme fatale, who is a singer.
Yes.
She's at the mercy of the crooks who have stolen the mechanized cannon. They want her to stay and perform. She has a gig or something in Mexico City.
Yeah.
But they won't give her money. So she goes, I'll go to Mexico City by hook or by crook. I'll get that money somehow. And how she gets the money is that she seduces.
Well,
It starts off that way.
So he initially thinks she's a girl from his hometown, and he comes in and asks her, "Are you that girl?"
He's tried to order a malted, and they've
given him the Morocco special or something.
They've given him the local special, the Morocco Sunrise or something, and it's a highly alcoholic concoction. We see the bartender mixing it, and it has about 10 different kinds of alcohol in it. Yeah. But it comes in a big kind of like milkshake cup with a straw. So Jerry Lewis thinks it's a milkshake.
Yeah, so he approaches her, says, "Are you that girl from my hometown?"
So we're from Scranton.
Yeah, and
Scranton, Missouri. Or?
Yeah. Okay, so she's like, "Okay, I'll have a drink with you, and we'll have a dance." The other guys come out of 60 Girls 60, learning that it's not actually 60 girls in there; it's women who are 60.
That's what they say.
Line.
Yeah,
it's a good line. So they come into the bar where Jerry is, and they see this girl dancing. She's cutting it up on the dance floor. They can't see Jerry because he's behind a post, and they're like, "Whoa, look at that girl!"
Yeah.
And they're like, "Who's that guy?
Who's the lucky guy that's dancing with her?"
And then we got away, and then we see Jerry out there, and he's actually a funny dance number in here because
he's doing a Jerry Lewis dance.
He's doing a Jerry Lewis dance. It's really good. I enjoyed that little Jerry Lewis moment. So then the guys figure out that she's trying to take him for money.
Yeah.
She's proposed. He's like, I'm going to marry her. He doesn't know her name, but
He's proposed to her, or she's proposed to him. He's given her his fraternity pin.
Yeah, and he's promised to lend her some money.
Everything he has.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything he has.
And the guys are like, this is a scam. They go back to their base, but David Wayne goes back and he talks her, I don't know, he gets the pin back. He's like, it's off.
Yeah. He talks her out of it. Well, he tells her that he's got cold feet. He tries to seduce her himself, but she won't go for it.
Yeah.
And this is where we get a hint that maybe she's not a femme fatale at all, and maybe she still is, but also that she's fallen in love with...
Yeah,
for no reason.
Because of his dance moves.
Because he's the star of this movie.
Yes,
so
yes, that's exactly it. He's the star. Yeah. I was annoyed by the first romance between the Major and David Wayne.
This one's even worse.
I was like, please don't give us a sad sack romance. An hour into it, I thought it wasn't going to happen. Suddenly, it's happening. So David Wayne comes back. He tells Sad Sack that Sad Sack is very angry at him for splitting up their engagement.
Yeah.
He decides to go AWOL. He writes a letter. He says, I'm going AWOL.
He goes AWOL to join the French Foreign Legion. He's already in French Morocco.
He goes back to the bar. He's captured by the guys who convince him that they are the French Foreign Legion's secret branch, and they need him to assemble the cannon. Because he knows how to do it. Yeah. He's kind of fumbled his way. He's revealed that he knows how to assemble it. So they're like, oh, well, we need you for the secret branch of the French Foreign Legion. They take him out to the desert. He builds the cannon for them.
Yep. Takes him a day, like half a day.
Meanwhile, the Zeta, the girl, comes to the guys, or tells them in the
barracks.
It's off screen, reveals to the two army guys that he's been captured, he's in trouble. So we actually have a desert adventure here happening where they have to go out to the desert, which looks very bad. And
the set, some of it they'd shoot in the desert later on.
Yes,
but this soundstage. It doesn't look real. Even in black
there's a shot, the very last shot of the movie.
They're in the damn
desert. We get
desert.
some actual F-14s or something flying over. It looks. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
It's like 3-4 flying information. I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And they fly past the actor, so it wasn't like stock footage. I was like really shocked. Oh, yeah. Anyway, here.
That's not till the end of the film. We have to struggle through a lot more.
No.
And it's on, as I say, it's on a soundstage. They've just got buckets of sand everywhere.
Yeah.
Even in black and white, it does not look good.
Yes. So. The Peter Lorre character is very keen to kill Jerry Lewis just because he's annoying.
Him now?
Yes, and Jerry Lewis he's been forced to act like his inferior and do push-ups and everything. Jerry Lewis is starting to act like a CO. She's like making him do push-ups and stuff like that. Yeah, and
he's gone mad with power.
Yes, there's a moment where.
Because they've given him a fake rank, a captain in the the French Foreign Legion special intelligence branch, and Peter Lorre's character is only a sergeant or something. Yeah. So which they introduced him as, I think, which they made up on the spot. But now, because they have to adhere to this masquerade
until he's built the cannon.
At which point, so he's always ordering Peter Lorre's character around. Give me a screwdriver. Give me some pliers. Go do 50 push-ups. And he just cannot wait to kill him.
Yes. Yeah. But there's a moment when he's finally been allowed where Jerry Lewis says, "I'm sorry, I made you do all those push-ups," and Peter Lorre is like, "No, push-ups make my wrist strong." And then he throws his knife and it sticks into a tree. And there's a look of such glee on Peter Lorre's face. So that was the one moment where it's like the old Peter Lorre was back.
Wasted in this
for
movie,
just a moment where he looks so gleeful at the strength of his wrist throwing that knife.
Yeah, it's just glad to be working at this point in his career.
So his friends show up, including Zeta. The three of them show up to rescue him, but they're all captured, chained up. There's a moment where Jerry Lewis has to pick up a key with his mouth, which is actually a little bit of good physical work, I would say.
Because they're all chained up to one another.
Yes.
And so for one person to get some slack on the chain, the other one has to contort themselves into an uncomfortable position.
Yeah.
So, and they're all three of them, they're all on top of one another, and it's alright. And then he picks up the key in his mouth and he says, "I got it!" And it flies out of his mouth.
And he loses it. So now they have to make their getaway. They fight waves of Arabs that are attacking them. Jerry Lewis has forgotten the judo he seemed to know.
Yeah, I wrote that too. He's forgotten all his judo.
He's really struggling to take these guys on. The whole plot with the Major said she was gonna, I think she said before they left she was gonna come to Morocco with the inspection team. And I was like, this character has disappeared for half an hour. Yeah. We're like, what happened to this plot? What happened to the whole thing about the psychological testing of an ordinary person? It's all just completely wiped away.
Yep. We've got a new plot now, which is this adventure adventure in the desert.
So
with
they
the
managed
cannon and
to
arrows.
to beat all these guys and capture them and rescue the cannon and bring it back.
That's when we get our desert shot, which
And we
is the
get the
marching single file through. I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually Morocco,
Yeah.
just like Sweet Gwendolyn, and he's towing them along behind single file behind the cannon, and they're all stumbling along.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah, and we get those fighter jets. I don't know what model they are, but it looked awesome.
Does look awesome. And
then the Major suddenly reappears for the last 30 seconds of the movie. She actually does show up with the...
Then they beat random complete strangers comment on her body again,
Yes.
as they've done all through the movie.
Yep.
She makes out with David Wayne. I don't know why. Well, because they're the designated couple for this film.
Yes, exactly. That's it. There's no other reason for it.
And then we have one last moment with Sad Sack where he accosts an infantryman for carrying his rifle wrong. Oh, first of all, the French are apparently still in Morocco, so it's still, when this film was made, 1956 is the year Morocco got independence.
Okay.
So I guess in the context of the film, it's still French Morocco.
Okay.
Because a French general shows up.
Yes,
And
that's right.
tells them that we've been trying to catch these bandits for so long, and then he puts the pin on all of them.
Yes.
And they've got a medal, fantastic,
Yeah.
and a special commendation and kiss on the cheek from the French general. So then Sad Sack, Bixby, Jerry Lewis accosts, sees an infantryman carrying his rifle wrong, grabs off and goes, "No, you're not supposed to carry it like that. You're supposed to carry it like this according to the manual." And then off goes the gun, and it smashes. Just as the general from Camp Calhoun, the guy whose tie he pulled off, and the guy whose tire he shot, is doing a toast with the French general, and the bullet goes right through their champagne glasses. And they just stare at it for a minute in silence, and the general looks at it, not the French general, the American one looks at it and goes, "There's only one man that could have been responsible for this."
Yes.
And the next scene is Jerry Lewis peeling a bunch of potatoes, which is very much something that the Sad Sack from the cartoon, from the comic would have done, but which has been very much missing from the film up to this point.
Yes.
He's peeling an enormous number of potatoes, and he sings his horrible song again.
Yes, and we also learned
Morocco.
that Zita has moved to the U.S.
Yeah,
in
she's
a
got
line
her
of dialogue.
flight. She's got a flight to
She's
Mexico.
moving to his hometown.
Oh, that's right. She was going to go to Mexico, but instead she's moving
changed
to
her mind.
his... Because she's fallen in love with him.
Because Sad Sack gets the girl. That's
Yeah.
what Sad Sack's all about.
Yeah, that's what Sad Sack's all about, alright. Brilliant. Well, and that's the end.
That's
That's the end of that terrible movie.
yeah.
I don't have any trivia at all, really.
Okay.
I'll just mention that we talked a little bit about how well this film did in France,
Okay.
with its almost 2 million tickets sold.
Yeah.
It cost $1.1 million US to make, $157, which is still pretty cheap. It made $3.5 million at the box office.
Okay.
But it was very much... I don't know if it'd be correct to call it a B movie, but it was released as a double feature with another Jerry Lewis movie.
Okay.
Which was called The Delinquent,
Okay.
or something along those lines, where he's playing a kind of James Dean figure, it looks
Okay.
like,
Okay.
or a Marlon Brando on the waterfront kind of
Uh-huh.
character, because it's him wearing a leather jacket under a lamppost on the
okay.
trailer, and that's all I know about it,
Yeah, right.
because I just saw the poster.
Okay.
So both of these films have completely vanished from public consciousness.
Yeah, right.
I could say, just to go back to Yank magazine,
Yeah.
we've really much covered it pretty much, but I will only say that at its peak, it had a circulation of 2.5 million copies.
Yeah.
And this is a magazine that wasn't sold
Yeah, right.
on newsstands.
Yeah.
This is just produced by the Army
Yeah.
for servicemen, mostly enlistees, and that they actually paid for 5 cents an issue. 2.5 million. Really, the American way to wage war. Just freaking overwhelming.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we should do our ratings.
Let's do
this
it.
Stage. Okay, the comics. The George Baker comics, not the Harvey comics, which are hard work.
We'll remove them from
Yes.
consideration,
Yeah.
because they are not Sad Sack. They just read, like you said, like a. It's just so
Although-
formulaic. Like, sure,
Yeah.
he's put upon, but the satire, because he's been demobbed and he's a civilian, the satire is gone. What
Yes.
makes them so funny is that it's poking fun at army life.
Yes.
Whereas he's not in the army. It's
Yeah.
just, oh look, he's paying for stuff, but he's not. This isn't an army experience anymore. He's just a schlub. It's just. What's
Yeah.
the point?
Yeah.
So let's remove that from contention. We
Okay.
won't vote on that. Let's just do the George
Okay.
Baker Yank ones.
Okay.
For me, it's yay. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was really, really surprising. Very skilled cartooning,
Right.
as I've said.
They look great,
funny.
but I mean, hilarious and at at once timeless, but also an interesting piece of history.
Yes, and culture, for sure.
And culture, absolutely.
Yeah. This movie.
Nay.
Yeah, nay. I did laugh at a few bits.
Yeah.
But you can't fast forward on YouTube to find those bits. Like, often I would say this movie's bad, but fast forward to this scene on YouTube. I can't even do that for any of the bits in this movie. It's a few...
Don't watch any of it.
Chuckles or smiles. Probably better than the Harvey Comics, though.
Yes, but yeah. I mean, if you like Jerry Lewis, I guess you'll enjoy
it's not even Jerry Lewis's best, and I like Jerry Lewis,
not.
and this is not the one I would go to for sure.
No, for me also it's an A.
And also, I think missing at this stage, second movie without a straight man, still trying to figure out how to work that kind of comedy. I think it's not working. He needs that Dean Martin there.
Yeah. He doesn't really have a straight man. The David Warren character
David Wayne does not work as normally you'd have Dean Martin in that role.
Yeah.
And the romance maybe would be more believable. I don't know, but it would make more. You would be expecting going in because this is the 10th movie we've seen with this dynamic.
Yeah. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work on any level really, and not as we've already covered. It's very sexist at times.
Yeah.
In a really jarring way. Even for the time. It's a little bit racist too, that's a bit more of its time. The Arabs have a brown face. At one point they're eating dates which have sheep eyes in them.
Yeah, that was
old
nonsense.
Stereotype.
Yes, yeah.
But that's more typical of the time, but the sexism was really egregious and really kind of like made those parts of the film unbearable for me.
Yeah.
So that's a heavy nay. And finally, the adaptation, it's a nay. It's another reason why I don't like this film, because this character is not sad sack. It's just Jerry Lewis.
Even further than Gwendoline, which is a movie we keep talking about this week, which had like two names, names of two characters. Names of two characters were the same, and that was kind of it. Very similar here. Oh, it's a dude in the army. They call him sad sack, but he's not a sad sack in any of the same ways that sad sack is. There's none of the unfairness. There's none of the bittersweetness. There's none of the army stuff that I didn't understand. You know what I mean? Like.
Yeah.
All the stuff that are specific to sad sack, and it says we get a quote.
And the character's completely different. As you said, he's not the everyman, the put upon everyman, just trying to get through the day, dodging officers, trying to find some female companionship. No. He's this lunatic.
Yeah. Baker said in one of the introductions that when he was animating at Disney, their exam was they had to animate these bouncing balls coming onto screen, and he had this ping pong ball that kept getting beaten up by the other balls.
Yeah, it got crushed by the basketball.
Would get crushed and then would come back and would just be beaten, resigned, tired, helpless, beaten is how he describes it. And that's how sad sack was supposed to be. And you don't get a ping pong ball out of Jerry Lewis in this movie at all. It's like they force some Hollywood agency onto him to a certain degree, and I don't know, the whole thing's it's
a big mess. But so it's definitely a nay adaptation for me. It's not anything like sad sack, and I just don't. It's not a good Jerry Lewis film.
No.
So it's failing on both those counts. Actually, you might remember for Gwendolyn, I actually voted yay as an adaptation for.
Yes,
Gwendolyn
I do remember that.
Whereas you voted nay.
Yes.
Whereas in this case, it's just a straight nay, because even though it looks nothing, he's nothing. They don't even say sad sack much during the film. I think they say it once. They say this Bixby's a real sad sack, and that's it.
Right. Yeah.
And he gets his song.
Yes. Yes.
But he's not miserable most of the time. He's always quite very cheerful most of the time.
That's exactly right. Because sad sack often in the strips of the last panel, he is beaten.
Always miserable.
He is beaten.
Yeah.
Absolutely defeated.
He'll perk up for a moment, but then he'll be crushed again.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so please like, subscribe, rate, and review, and please come to our Patreon. I didn't mention that I actually bought the DVD for this movie this week, so we'd have a higher res copy than the one that's on YouTube.
Yep.
I paid $1.20 for it.
So
plus
to
$2.
our loyal Patreon, $1.20 of your
that's where
generous contribution has gone to buying a DVD.
In addition to the hosting fees and everything else this week. Okay, next week we're going to do Scott Pilgrim because the anime is dropping on Netflix, which has all the same voice actors that were the actors from the movie.
Great.
So, I've seen it twice, and I'm looking forward to watching it again.
Excellent. Me too.
Everybody calls me sad sack. I hear it all day long. Though I try to do the right thing, it always turns out wrong. Everybody calls me sad sack, including my best gal. I drop my ashes all over her clothes, and I misplace her keys. Then for forgiveness I send her a rose, and roses always make her sneeze. Achoo! The lamp is so bright, I pull out the plug. Her arms then open to give me a hug. I run to kiss her and trip on the rug. I'm the genuine, original, first edition copy of Sad Sack. Sad Sack.
And I explained to him that most boys I knew who were into comics at that age were, either into Marvel, things like Spider-Man, Iron Man, the Hulk, Thor, X-Men, or into DC, stuff like Superman and Batman and Green Lantern. But somehow, I got steered into Harvey Comics. And Harvey Comics, their roster of heroes consisted of an assortment of basically pathetic, feckless, feeble-minded pariahs. These were, come to think of it, actually the first misfits I befriended. A couple of them were clearly psychotic, but for the most part, they were just fantastically stupid. I mean, like mentally defective, low-grade moron stupid. A bunch of guffawing, gullible half-wits who just wanted everyone to be their friend, who'd get into a car with anyone, sell their souls for a cupcake literally made out of crap, follow a fucking balloon off the ledge of a building, but I just found myself identifying with them in a particularly intense way. I felt that they related uncannily to everything I was going through in my life at that time. And I guess I also thought, even at that age, that they were, in some sense, the most poetic of all the comic book characters. Sad Sack, the luckless, disaffected, humiliated soldier. Baby Huey, the ungainly, naive, dim-witted, friendless, anthropomorphic duck. Little Lotta, a homely, obese girl whose insatiable gluttony gave her superhuman strength, which she'd used to help people who still found her completely revolting. Hot Stuff, a devil baby who wore asbestos diapers. And, of course, Casper, the friendly, clawingly obsequious ghost. I just really connected, on a very deep level, with these characters. And the question is, what was it inside me? What gnawing void or strangulated loop of psyche had produced such a strong feeling of fellowship with a lonely, anomic army private with latent spree-killing tendencies, a retarded duck, a bullied fat girl, an incontinent demon, and a desperately ingratiating dead child?